Peter Hill Explains, where I invite you to join the science teaching conversation with me about corruption. I'd like to talk about it from a information science perspective rather than a personal perspective about any particulars, because it makes people feel really uncomfortable if they go through and they can just wind up saying, oh look, that's corrupt, that's really bad behaviour. And that's really not what we're after. We're about looking more analytically at it. And look, by and by, there's sort of a saying that 80% of the population will say, look, they've experienced corruption or nepotism or some things which aren't right, or a vote which is rigged or something like that. And 20% will say it's not there at all, they've never experienced it. And there is a saying that those 20% are likely to be the people most deeply involved in this type of activity. So corruption, try and get away from that as a sort of emotionally charged term, and actually sort of look at it as a spectrum. So on one side, that you could go up to someone and say, how much for that car? And at one spectrum, that person will say, well, that's not my car, that's so-and-so else's car, but I believe from my knowledge of that, that car is not very roadworthy, and I advise you not to buy it. Or the other end of corruption, you could say, I do own the car, and it's great, and you give false information and gain benefit from it. So there's the basic sorts of ideas, the sort of information science thing where you affect the outcomes, the behaviour, the distribution of outcomes by injecting information which is not necessarily true or on the overall aspects of it. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. That in our entire environment, we can only pick up a certain shreds of information. We've got to actually assume things are by their badge. So if a policeman tells me something, I tell it by the badge, and I do it. So there's a lot of things that we do. So if we buy a product, we see the company name, we assume that's okay. So a lot of this corruption is involved in assumptions that you make, and so if you're the victim of corruption, you'll be sincerely aware that you don't have access to putting your side of the story forward. People aren't necessarily interested. You don't have the forum to put it through. And I suppose in this as much as this is possible, I'm slowly responding, improving my ability to speak, communicate on that level, and increasing the rate and scope of communication. So just recently I just done a podcast on scrap metal. So I spoke to someone, walked, did a podcast, went back, and within 20 minutes I had gone up to him with here's the Google shortcut to it, shortened URL to it, and was able to move out. That's there. So that's not necessarily sort of threatening, but it's saying that as an individual, if you can communicate more or have a greater social network, you can actually move across. And I'm sort of working on this on a longer term time scale. That is increasing or reducing the amount of overhead to produce the communication, increasing its spread, and actually linking more and more people and organisations into the coordination medium. So it's not directed against corruption, but it improves your basic social connection health, I suppose. It changes the perception of what we can do. So often, so if you actually look at this, the lack of information is a necessary thing to do in such a complex information-full environment where you can actually, with some money, buy something which generations ago it would be unthinkable. Like I can go up to a website. Imagine this. How would you explain this to someone from not last century, but the century before, in the 1890s? How would you explain that? I go on a computer, I type something in, the money gets taken out electronically, and then I walk up, and then I can board an aircraft and fly across. These are all this information, and it's actually built on a huge trust information network. We trust the fuel is good, we trust the engines are good, we trust there's so much to trust in there, and so there's a great opportunity for people who come in and not look at it to actually play a game, or game theory. So there's a mathematician called Nash, played by Russell Crowe. Look, I'm having a real great field day here. Before I found previously I couldn't remember names as quickly from this, but Russell Crowe's one name I've been practicing in my head in terms of regaining my memory. But he plays John Nash. Oh, again, that's gonna. But he developed the idea of game theory. That is, where you, as an agent, pick up a strategy based on the lack of information other agents have, and so in general, your suboptimal decision is on average more optimal than just going for the optimal decision. And so there's all this. There's a necessary aspect to trusting and lack of information, and it's when people actually slide into that amount of not providing the full amount of information, or stifling the flow of information from you in a particular way, that you can actually detect where people have gone over the edge into fair play game theory stuff, where you're going for a job interview and you've done better research on it and you know the better things to say, as opposed to keeping the information from other people who can fairly get it, so to give yourself an advantage. All these things you have to really go through, but it's all about comparative access to information and who believes who and things like that. Is all the actual underpinning of corruption to get through here. So I hope you can see in terms of data. Now information is attached to an object is all important. How our behaviour is related to an object. So say for that car, who owns the car is a critical, vital piece of information. And in general, you get information degradation. That is, if something is left out and there's no ownership and no one knows anything about it, the information gets lost. So if you isolate a person and cut their information flow out from them, they become ready for recycling. So you can see that people who are on the out get a reduced access to information, and their information health flow is steadily reduced. And there can be reasons for it, but that's a typical thing that you see people reduce that information flow. Now, I haven't really thought about it, but this is one of the things of strengthening your position with respect to corruption. So this is not fighting corruption, it's just moving your positioning, your inertial energy. So it means in terms of cost budgets of what they're going to do, what they afford. So the game theory, let's go through the Nash one in the film. This mathematician was in a bar. These four people there. These four beautiful women came in, but there was one particularly beautiful woman, and people ignored her, and that's because there's a whole game theory that this woman knows that the most beautiful woman, if you go for the most beautiful woman, all the other women who you might lose out against think poorly of you. They're your second choice, and therefore if you don't get that beautiful woman, you get no person. That might be it. I'm just sort of calling, I can't quite remember it. So the information is that if you could go out and just say, privately and work out who gets who, you could optimize it, but it means that no one has the information to go for the most beautiful woman. And in fact, there's been people doing the mathematics of beauty, and that the games people play with more beautiful people means that they have less reliable coherent, well thought out offers. They've got more ambit claims put for them because they are so beautiful. They can afford to take a risk on the off chance that they're beautiful. And in an event this, I think Dutch mathematician worked out that beautiful people are less happy. Thank goodness for him, he said. And look, there's lots of ironical sort of research, wistful. In some papers out there, there's one person I think I can remember who discovered that his feet repelled mosquitoes, and he wrote it up in a paper, and then a pharmaceutical company patented his feet, and so he was rather miffed by the entire process. And there's this subtle. There should be a reference to these papers which are scientific, but with the human aspect to it. And again, this game theory is so powerful because it's got a human aspect to it, and it actually comes across to it. So the people, and this is relevant to, say, recycling. So you can have a perfectly good car, but if it's got no rego papers, no history, its price drops. This is why cars drop as soon as they go out of the showroom. The information deteriorates around them, and so it just means that if you repair the car and you get a feedback from it, you don't know how to interpret it because you don't have the necessary full suite of information. So the information is value in our society of where we have processes, people who rely on the information to go through. And so this is one aspect of corruption, but earlier today I had this conversation with this experience. I was looking at a soccer match, and I was having sort of a wide-ranging conversation with this person who was a 45-year-old soccer player, really saying how fantastic his 11-0 loss was on Saturday. He just came from an 11-0 loss, and his team, which had 55-year-olds, 60-year-olds playing, were playing against another much younger team, and they got whipped. And we're just discussing overall the general things, and I was mentioning about how coaches, particularly at club level, have a gentleness, and that I didn't feel the coach that I was listening to at the moment from the opposite side, who was saying, go out, kick this, kick that, and he made the observation that people can't transition from being a player to being a coach, so they think they're out in the field and they actually follow the ball around and actually give advice on how they would play the ball. So they haven't done that management transition up there. And so in this case, our team was 7 and the opposition team had 11 players. I think they had a lot of players on the field, yet our team was at one stage 3-0 up. And this is because the observation was this coach was running his players, and they weren't just, as he said, operating strategically, keeping the ball, wearing the 7 players out, and then just going in for the kill in the second half. That going in for the kill in the second half just tipped them over. The final score, because I know there'll be soccer people out there, was 4-3 against our team. As things that they did wear out, so this is an analysis of the coach, and I had said that the thing is that you watch TV and you see a great soccer player who's got great skill with the ball, and you watch that and go forward. And then I think the coaches who haven't necessarily made the transition from being a player to a coach want to know how to be a coach and actually see these big players. Now, the only thing they do coach, and they've got professional players which play all the time. There's no other factors going across, and there's no other. There's sort of business coaching where the egos go up and the press it sort of amplifies it, and so you get this big business view of coaching, and that doesn't. Although the playing ideally translates down to how you play on the soccer field, the coaching doesn't translate down. And surprisingly, he picked it up. And so this goes in terms of we've covered sort of the how of corruption, not directly, but in terms of information flow. So rather than actually unpicking the corruption, you're looking at how the information flows. And this is sort of the why of corruption, in that people move into an environment and don't have the correct skill set. They do believe they have a skill set by watching how people behave in TV and articles and stuff like that, but it's sort of like a big business executive trying to run the local fruit shop. There is a majesty of being small, the small things, the chats with the customers, the look for sort of where is that mouse dropping coming from, stuff like that, stuff which you, as big business manager, you'd say, oh, I'm not interested, no, I've got better time to do. And so someone who comes in and says, suddenly here's a store for you to manage, and you just watch a few Netflix movies about the big managers in the US, Manhattan and stuff like that, and they hear about Donald Trump, and that's the way to manage the art of the deal. The thing is that they're not going to go as well long term. Sorry, they're not going to go as well long term as another business next to them who does look after the customers, make sure there's no cockroaches and things around. It's a whole different subtle way of doing it. Now, what actually goes in the big business, there's a new level of, I suppose, corruption. And look, I would say going up to a country and saying, or how can I look big here? I'll ask for 4% defence spending, or something like that. I will, if I want to look powerful in front of Korea, I'll badmouth Canada so they know that I'm a serious player. Sort of a show of strength. It's right. It's game theory. It's doing something to create an impression and a thought, but you are dealing with countries, so it's almost as though your management styles don't fit the actual situation. So if you're dealing with countries, millions of people, you've got a different sort of responsibility for if you're just dealing with a company, and you're competing with other companies and stuff like that. And it also doesn't make sense if you are doing something local and small scale. And as you translate the game theory from one scenario into another, although it is justified in one scenario, it suddenly becomes much more corrupt in the other scenario. So I don't know if you can follow me on that. It's just, say, behaviour which would be getting the up. I think I watched Suits. I just find it that appalling. It is, well, not the American person feeling so good. I was able to tell something and people were confused, and it's all this game theory and stuff like that. Well, you really don't. If you, the greatest thing to do is to sit back and let it incubate, control. Yeah. So, well, let's go. There's the information control, the scenario process where people progress to environment with look at their eyes on the future, but not the eyes on the environment. But there's also another thing I have to say is about tempo. One of the things you'll pick up with if you're in a corrupt environment is tempo. People will suddenly say, I want this by then, or by a particular deadline, and the deadline won't be justified in terms of a process. They will try and control the tempo. And I don't know how to describe this as something that I'm not militaristic at all, but when I was doing some infantry training, would have these very, very wise, I thought they were wise, Korean War. I believe that's how I'm so old. I had Korean War warrant officers from the Malaya Emergency and some Vietnam officers. So there were people who served in Vietnam and were officers in the CMF. And they would say, oh, well, look, what you want to do in every situation is control and have a sense of the tempo of the situation. So in a battle situation, you want to control the tempo. And that's not necessarily raise the tempo, but organise things where it's going to go and suit you. Or, again, I'd go off with, we'd have a firing range, and the tracer, when they had it, would go off over the top and start a bushfire, and they'd shut down the range and get on a a Land Rover with 7 people, and again a wise warrant officer who sat there just sitting back, sort of looking at you, what to say. And we beat one fire, and we were absolutely bushed. But while the next fire came, they shut the range down, and we were completely stuffed. And he said, "Look, 7 men. The fire is this big. It's going to take you that long to do it. So just pace yourself." Which is sort of like controlling the tempo, and the tempo in, say, almost anything. One of the best techniques. This is going back. Tempo is something that you can pick up on many times. I'm very much conscious, say, of the tempo of podcast producing. It's got to go at a certain tempo to match variations. But one of the things is that they would give you on an infantry assault course, it would be a long course. So you go somewhere, pitch your tent, go somewhere else, to a new grid coordinate, do this, go to another grid coordinate, do that, go to this and not be seen. Then so you'd be exhausted, and then what will always happen is that they would have you got to boil some water, and then you boil some water, and then you go off and do shooting at a range, for instance. And I made the mistake. Of let's hurry, boil the water, come on, hurry. Of course, the water is going to boil at a certain rate. You've got so much water, and it just so happens that there's an army hexamine tablet, a little tablet which you burn, and it's designed to boil the water not fast, not too much, optimally, and it takes exactly 4 minutes to boil at a watt. And so what you have to do is one soldier sets up the thing to boil, it boils water, and the rest you're resting during that time. So the actual control of tempo and the use of quiet times and stuff like that. There's also so there's sort of tips. We're not talking directly about corruption, but sort of the nature of corruption and sort of an intelligent response to it. The other thing is really taking your time to actually look at correspondence that comes your way. So the major thing is not to, I said something on de-escalation, is always look for a way of de-escalation. So if something comes along you don't like, you say, this may cause a few problems, would you like to rephrase it? Because that really gets up people's noses, so you've got to make sure you pick the appropriate time. But also looking at the document itself. One of the most important things is when you get the document is to pick up the metadata. So if you get the document and never open it for editing, you actually keep it preserved. So you've never edited it. And if you edit something, you always put keep tracking on. Yeah, so in editing documents, you always put, you're in the right, and you always have a document, keep tracking on to keep it going. Now, then, so it's looking at the metadata, seeing who edited it and when. Also looking for, say, if you have to give documentation, just mark it in a particular way so that you can see whether it's modified or the period time for it. Look for editing mistakes. That's very typical. So, say if there's a document which is part of a full process, it will have been gone through like that. But if they've got a document which they've edited and got ready for you just before, there's something always in the brushing things that you can see. It's a font mistake or something. The letters are, to say, too close to a line or something. You can generally pick what's going ahead. There's not much you can do with it, but once you know that the document is not a full process document, it's one that's going ahead, you can change the tempo and the pace of what's going on. And of course you don't go up to them immediately and say, oh look, hey mate, I've done this, I can look at the metadata, I can see where you've edited and who's written it. Then you don't do that, you just keep very quiet and push it across. And there's lots of processes which you can go and look at editing and look at it. So this is where you're at. Will you win? Is it possible to win the corruption battle? I think I had to say you're not going to win. because there's people who are really corrupt have actually sealed off every door. You're in, go around, and you're in your boat, and everything's locked off and going down. However, you get a little bit of scuba diving gear, be able to actually swim away from the wreck rather than actually be emotionally caught up in the wreck. You just by keeping on top of it. Alex, really hope that this is of some value to some people out there. I did notice that people were interested in the concept of de-escalation. I've done a course on conflict resolution, and it's not moving very quickly, moving at a constant, predictable pace, and not blaming facts, sort of moving the facts more to the way that people are interpreting facts, which will give a route forward. And the major thing is that the person who has got the route forward, which isn't, so obviously if you're suffering corrupt behaviour, the route forward is you're or so and so is the winner. It's just slowly develop another route forward. Thanks for listening. Another podcast, another story comes to a close. It's been a pleasure sharing this moment in time with you. May you discover truly amazing things, understand them, and tell others. Thanks for listening.